universities are calling for increased diversity and inclusion, but the truth is, we've always had diversity throughout our history. But structural and systemic discrimination had prevented these diverse human resources to fully demonstrate their abilities and play an active role in society. The same is true of universities. Universities have a mission to nurture young people who possess diverse experiences, backgrounds, and ways of thinking. What then must the university do to help each of these individuals achieve their full potential? While it is important to be aware of our unconscious biases, it is equally important to reflect upon the current organizational structure through being aware of our majority privileges. In this video, I would like to present alternative ways to raise the awareness of university upper-level management who have decision-making powers in their respective institutions.
What does it mean to make majority privilege visible? Let's start with the definition of privilege. Privilege is defined as unearned access to social power based on membership in a dominant social group. The point here is the word unearned. It is not an advantage gained through one's effort, but rather an automatic benefit afforded to an individual just by being born into or belonging to a dominant social group. For example, we might consider what benefits men automatically receive from being born male or being male in Japanese society. Still, privilege is not an easy concept to grasp, so I will use the metaphor of an automatic sliding door. The image on the right is a person who has privilege. When they move forward toward their goal or a destination, the transparent automatic door quickly opens for them. Because the automatic door opens each and every time, the person is unaware of the existence of the automatic door, nor that it is opening for them each time. This means that the person can move forward towards their goal without encountering much obstacles. This is what privilege looks like. Then what kind of a person is the person on the left? This is the person whom the doors do not automatically open for them. This person tends to be someone who has one or more minority identities. When this person tries to move forward toward their goal, the door won't open, so they have to pry it open for themselves or file a complaint and are told to get the key from somewhere else. This causes one to waste time and energy. There are also cases where the door will not open no matter how hard one tries. Now, those who have moved on far to the front may look back and see their minority colleagues way behind them. The person with the dominant identity does not see the structural barriers that prevent the minority individual from moving forward and thinks, I have worked hard to get to where I am. There must be something wrong with that person for not getting here like I have, and tends to blame the person for their dispositions, such as lacking effort, motivation, leadership skills, and/or ability. The reality is that people with dominant identities who have been privileged within the organization have greater difficulty in seeing the structural discrimination that people with minority identities face. So the question is, what is actually operating these automatic doors? Yes, it is the sensor. It is this sensor that opens the door for the majority and closes the door for the minority. The many sensors within our society are responsible for creating injustice and inequality. It is this automatic door sensor that must operate more fairly in order for minorities to be able to move forward in the same way as those in the majority, and we need structural reforms to achieve such equity.
So what do I mean by majority and minority here? 7 attributes or identities are listed here to the left, and in each of these, I have divided them into majority and minority. The word majority is often used to mean a numerical majority, but for the purpose of this presentation, I use the word majority to mean the side with more power. The side with less power is thus the minority. It is those on the minority side who are subject to structural discrimination. Please take a moment to reflect on your majority-minority identities. If you found that you were the majority in all 7 categories, it probably means that you are likely to be on the side of great power in Japanese society.
We generally have both majority and minority identities, and so even those of you who found themselves to be in the majority in all 7 identities, if you keep searching, you will probably find a minority identity as well. This majority-minority concept can also change depending on the context and situation. For example, when a Japanese person goes abroad, they become racial and linguistic minorities. I mentioned earlier that social inequality is caused by a rigged censor. And so let's take a look at what might constitute the censor, the 3 forms of discrimination. The first is direct discrimination. This is discrimination at the individual level, so-called discrimination that occurs between individuals. Next is institutional discrimination, which takes place within our social institutions such as law, education, politics, media, business, and academia. These institutions have a great deal of power and can take time to change. Last is cultural discrimination, which are the values and attitudes shared by members of society. This can include the unconscious biases we have, or the stereotypes such as science and math are for boys, humanities for girls, or patriarchal concepts such as men work outside the home, women inside the home. These attitudes can be oppressive to those who fall outside of societal norms. Thus, going back to what constitutes majority privilege, it is being able to be free of such 3 forms of discrimination in many aspects of one's life. In addition, I would like to introduce an activity to visualize the structure of privilege within academia. Each of you is a researcher in your own country. You all have the potential to get a job at a university or research institute and establish yourself in academia if you only work hard. The way to do this is to roll up the piece of paper into a ball and throw it into the waste bin in front of you. Now please throw the ball from where you are sitting. Here's a clip of me actually doing this activity in my class at Sophia University. There were 3 large boxes placed in front of the classroom, and everyone was asked to throw the ball all at once. Those sitting in the front are naturally more likely to get their balls into the box. So what often happens is that students sitting in the back of the classroom would shout out, "This is unfair, this is a rigged game." But never once did a student sitting in the front row call out, "Professor, this is unfair." Although this activity is designed to help people experience having or not having privilege, it could also be considered a microcosm of the actual structure of society and the university. Minority members can often detect the unfairness of the system, but it is often difficult for those in the majority to detect the structural injustice. What kind of people are sitting at the very front? It is those who have the most dominant identities. Here is an important point you should know. Just because you're privileged doesn't mean you're not putting in any effort. Even those who have a lot of privilege, i.e. majority identities, we acknowledge that you definitely worked hard to get to where you are. However, I think we also need to acknowledge that minority group members often have to work many times harder to get to the same place. Also, if you have a lot of majority identities, but do not feel that you were given preferential treatment in any way, perhaps another way of looking at it is, were you then disadvantaged based on your dominant identity? If not, that too is a form of majority privilege. This is why privilege is hard to see by those who have it. Now, in order to make structural discrimination more visible, the concept of intersectionality is also essential. There's a riddle that goes like this. In an American company called A, half of the employees are black and half are women, but not a single black woman. How is that possible? What do you think? The answer is that all black employees were men and all the women employees were white. Nevertheless, Company A cleverly slipped past accusations of racial and sex discrimination. This actually happened at General Motors, a company that did not employ a single black woman before 1964, and all the black women hired after 1970 were fired in a restructuring in 1974. And these black women sued GM for discrimination against black women. However, the court did not recognize the problem, saying that GM was hiring women, and so they could not be accused of sex discrimination. And they couldn't be accused of racial discrimination because they were hiring black men. However, not a single black woman had been hired. So what was the problem? This highlights the problem that occurs without the framework of intersectionality, whereby those who have more than one minority identity easily falls through the cracks of such anti-discriminatory measures. When you try to achieve equality through tackling discrimination only from a single dimension, discrimination against people with two or more minority identities will persist. When we translate this to universities, we must also ask whether we are favoring Japanese women when we hire women. Are we including all women, even those who are ethnic minorities, foreign nationals, transgender women, or women with disabilities? Even if the organization's diversity efforts target, quote, women, unquote, are all women really taken into account? Perhaps when you look around your institutions, members of the dominant groups tend to be by far the most common. The next most common are those with only one minority identity, such as women. But when we try to think of members in our institutions with two or more minority identities, the numbers drop significantly. It is thus important to be aware of the possibility that this lack of diversity is due to structural problems that do not incorporate the framework of intersectionality. I mentioned earlier that privilege is difficult to see for those who have it. But why is it difficult for those on the majority side to recognize their privilege? There are several reasons for this. First is that members of dominant groups tend to not develop a strong sense of belonging to the group to which they belong. For example, people with disabilities have a sense that they are part of a group of people with disabilities, but those who are able-bodied are less likely to consider themselves to be part of an able-bodied group. The second is due to structural linguistics. It has been found that in the language, the dominant group tends to be unmarked. For example, a male actor is called an actor, but a female actor is called an actress. Or a male doctor is called a doctor, but a female doctor is called a female doctor. This type of unmarking and marking in language causes unconscious imprinting that members of dominant groups are normative and standard. Lastly, it is said that members of majority groups tend to only compare themselves to those who are ahead of them, not behind them. For example, studies have shown that men are less likely to compare themselves to women, but are more likely to compare themselves to men of higher status than themselves, thus making them more likely to focus on their minority status rather than their majority status. What can we do to become more aware of our majority privilege? Here is a checklist to help visualize male privilege. If you respond yes to any of the items on this checklist, then there is a chance you may be enjoying male privilege. If I get married in the future and have children, I do not think that I will carry a greater burden than my partner. When I don't get my point across at a meeting, I rarely wonder if it is because of my gender. I have never thought that my intellectual ability might not be considered attractive to the opposite sex. In the organizations to which I belong, the leader or representative is usually a person of the same gender as myself. Generally speaking, people of the same gender as myself are more likely to get ahead than people of the opposite gender. I don't think much about gender equality. These items are just the tip of the iceberg of how men experience the automatic door opening in their favor. Next, let me explain what allies can do. An ally refers to people with majority identities who, together with minorities, take action to dismantle structural discrimination. One example is the action taken by Dr. Francis Collins, the former director of the U.S. National Institutes of Health, who announced in 2019 that he will no longer speak at scientific conferences where there are only male panelists. He said the reason is that inclusive efforts, such as increasing the number of women and other minorities, must start at the top. Thus, when such decisions are made at the top level, organizations are forced to adapt and change. Another example, Daisuke Tsuda, the artistic director of the 2019 Aichi Triennale, said, The current structure advantages men. In order to change that, I decided to take concrete action and decided to equalize the ratio of male and female artists. This was received favorably, but it was pointed out that if a woman artistic director had done exactly the same thing, it may have not been met with such praise. Tsuda is aware that it is his male privilege that also made it easier for him to take such concrete action. There is much that can be done by those in leadership positions who are already positioned to enact changes through their leadership and vision. Here's another example of an ally. A male professor was invited to join the editorial board of an influential magazine. He declined, saying, "Aren't there already enough men on the editorial board? I would like to give my seat to a woman professor." When you feel that you've done well for yourself, one way to be an ally is giving up your position to a minority member. Finally, DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion initiatives, cannot be expected to be effective simply by increasing the knowledge of the members of upper management who have the decision-making authority. Each of us is required to undergo a kind of personal transformation based on understanding where we are positioned in society.
Such transformation begins with an awareness of the majority privilege one has, and to develop the skills to be able to really listen to what members of minority groups are saying and demanding. It is such abilities that will in the end result in enhancing a diverse and healthy organizational structure that will also result in positive evaluations of those in leadership positions. It is important to consider what can be done to remove structural barriers. I hope this video was able to provide some hints in how to start making majority privilege visible and thinking of what each of us can do to dismantle structural discrimination.